Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a better day than I am. I woke up and the Surfline forecast said the waves were meant to be absolutely pumping, and it is quite the opposite of that. I'm also going to test out my 100 meters at the local track this afternoon, and we're going to have a gale force headwind. But the one thing I am in control of is staying on top of my YouTube schedule. So today's video, we're going to talk about movement quality, which I hope you can't hear the bird just going crazy outside my apartment. If you keep up with my content, you'd be forgiven for thinking that movement quality isn't something that I think is important. And the reason I never really explore it through my content, whether it's my short form or honestly, like a lot of my short form is poking fun at the idea of coaches who overemphasize movement quality. And then just with how overemphasized I feel like movement quality is by our entire industry, it's led to me just not participating in the conversation whatsoever. And then I get really triggered by other coaches' content on movement quality. So what I've realized is even if I think a topic is overemphasized, if I want it to be discussed in a certain way, at the end of the day, you just got to participate in the discussion. So here is my take on movement quality. And then we're going to get into maybe why some of your clients move like crap, or for lack of a better word, they're just not moving how you want them to, whether you're coaching a hinge or a squat, or whether you're trying to isolate a muscle for hypertrophy reasons or something. And also I have discussed how I feel like it's a straw man that, you know, movement optimists such as myself, and I guess a lot of the people who follow me and consume my content, that we don't care about movement quality at all. But often there is truth in every stereotype. And I think that there's a small segment of movement optimists that maybe do fall into the lazy coach role. And again, this is not me straw manning movement optimism, because I'm a staunch movement optimist and I value movement quality. I talked to Alec Blennis, I talked to Adam Meekins. I haven't spoken directly with Greg Lehman about this topic, but all of these people do care about movement quality. They're just careful about where they place it in the total hierarchy of importance. And now, while I do the majority of my work online these days, whether it's training people online, educating people online, putting out a lot of content, I still consider myself very much in the trenches. I'm in a commercial gym like 6 days a week. I'm talking to general population. I'm talking to trainees from beginner, intermediate, all the way up to advanced. So I back myself when it comes to understanding the general zeitgeist and attitudes towards fitness as a whole. And one of the frustrating parts of the conversation when you talk to these coaches who place movement quality above everything else in their training hierarchy is that they just don't understand how shit scared the average person is of doing something wrong and then injuring themselves in the gym. Or there's just this perception that exercise in the gym isn't safe at all, and everyone needs to be hyper fixated on moving and, you know, maintaining perfect alignment or moving precisely the way their coach does. Otherwise they're going to wreck their body. They're going to suffer chronic pain, horrible injuries. And I know that there's going to be coaches watching this who really place a high emphasis on movement quality, and they'll be like, no, like, you know, the people I work with aren't actually that scared of how they move their bodies. I would estimate that 95% of the people I interact with still suffer from an immense degree of kinesiophobia, which is just, you know, fear of moving your body, which is crazy. And so for all you movement quality emphasizing coaches, you may not have directly or deliberately made someone fear moving their body, but because you didn't explicitly tell them that it's safe and that movement quality doesn't increase your risk factor for injury or suffering from pain or anything like that, that's why they're holding on to these beliefs. So it's not even necessarily that the movement quality emphasizing coaches are creating this fear in the general public, but you have a responsibility as a coach to understand the beliefs that people often hold before they've even interacted with you. Overcoming fear of movement is such a barrier to people engaging with exercise, whether it's engaging with it at all or just engaging with it vigorously enough to get the results that they want. So before you hammer your new clients about all these ideas about movement quality and working on that, just have a quick conversation about them, about what are their beliefs about human movement. Do they know that the body is incredibly resilient and adaptable? Because chances are that's not at the front of their mind when they're being introduced to all these new movement patterns in the gym. So why is movement quality or good technique even important? And where does it fit in the total hierarchy? In my opinion, for beginners, it barely matters at all. Where it starts to become more of a factor is for people getting more towards the intermediate stages of training, and then more emphasized for people who are very advanced or where training takes up a large portion of their overall life and their goals for life. So for example, for powerlifters or Olympic lifters or any strength sports athlete, there is this efficiency side to movement quality. But then for your average intermediate to advanced trainee, movement quality or good technique is part of how we manage the load the different parts of the human system are experiencing at any given point. So there's this funny quote that a lot of people say, it's any movement is a back exercise if you do it wrong enough. And I definitely think there's some truth in that. People who are staunchly against the use use of machines and they really emphasize a lot of barbell or free weight training with their clients, there'll be so many times where they're trying to do a movement that's purely about moving your limbs around, but then there'll just be all this flexion and extension of the spine, assisting them in shifting the weight around. Another classic example would be you want your client to get down into a deep squat and they've got the barbell across their back and they've just extended the hell out of their spine, big flared rib cage, pelvis is super anteriorly rotated, and then as they're trying to get deeper in a squat, either they can't make it below parallel, or in order to make it below parallel, then they have to leave this anteriorly tilted spinal extension position, and then they just dump into a full posterior tilt of the pelvis and completely flex their spine. And then so people who usually do that in their squat, they do the same thing when they're hinging, they do the same thing when they're bench pressing or overhead pressing, and then they're trying to troubleshoot their programming. They're like, wait, am I doing too much back work? But all they see is like, no, squats, that's a leg exercise. Nah, hinges, that's for working my hips. They're like, why am I just blowing up my back all the time? Just because you write down this hypothetical program of where you'd like the load to go on a spreadsheet, the way that your client executes it is going to dictate a large amount of how that load goes through the system. And so the spine's just one example, but I think it's a relatable one for a lot of it. A higher degree of movement quality just means more consistent and intentional load management. So where poor movement quality lets these people down is we get all this unintentional load throughout various parts of the system that's really hard to account for. Then we get all these weird flare-ups or soreness or just general load management issues, and you're looking at your program, you're scratching your head, you're like, how do I even fix this? Again, it's probably movement quality is something that then you need to look at. Okay, so what are my best tips for improving your clients' movement quality, or basically just getting them to move the way that you want them to? There's this really famous quote in the fitness industry, I think it was said by Tom Myers, the Anatomy Trains guy: first move well, then move often, which is completely arse backwards. It's moving often is what leads to moving well. And Tommy's probably responsible for a lot of coaches overemphasizing movement quality, and you can sort of see how that attitude is problematic. Like, how are you meant to move well before you get some practice in by moving often? But he's coming from a place of thinking that movement quality has a direct correlation with pain or injury, which we know it doesn't these days. And this is a big part of where you as a coach need to adjust your expectations for untrained and beginner clients. If you're training someone who's never trained properly before, has no muscle mass, is sedentary 70% of their day, you should expect them to have terrible movement quality. Maybe exercise selection is more of a factor at this point. It's just really poor exercise selection, exposing the lack of movement quality in your clients. Classic examples will be coaches trying to get their somewhat obese, very weak client to do split squat variations, and their movement's just all over the place. For untrained people, a staggered stance is highly unstable, and it actually requires a considerable amount of strength to squat majority of your weight on one leg. At the end of the day, your exercise technique is just an expression of your physical qualities, and if your physical qualities are in the toilet, all your movements are just going to look garbage unless you're on a highly constrained machine setup with a lot of external stability. And this is where a lot of anti-machine-based training coaches create a lot of problem for themselves and their clients. They're stuck in this perpetual cycle of their client moves like crap because they don't have any physical qualities. They refuse to give them easy exercises like externally stabilized machine-based resistance training, and they're stuck in this cycle of not having any good physical qualities, moving like crap, not having any good physical qualities, moving like crap. But the movement quality obsessed coaches will just put it down to like, oh, I think it's because they don't have any hip internal rotation. Again, they don't have any hip internal rotation because they sit in a chair 6 hours a day and they can't hinge or squat for shit. Meet them where they're at with maybe, some leg press, some leg extensions, some hammy curls, some hip extensions where they're laying on their back. Like, these are all exercises where it's really, really hard to mess it up. You can actually build some strength, and then before you know it, you'll be able to feed them all these way more advanced variations where they're in a staggered stance and they don't have anything to assist with their balance, and they'll just be giving you these clean reps because they've developed some physical qualities. The physical qualities come first, then we get movement quality. It's not the other way around. They do feed into each other a little bit as you advance through your training journey, but at the start, we must emphasize the development of physical qualities. And now we can talk about some of the proprioceptive issues that are really common amongst untrained people. If you're cueing your client's axial skeleton position or like pelvis, spine, rib cage, head position. And you know, where you've said the same cue a million times. You're like, tuck your pelvis before you start the squat. Say we're trying to get them into that nice stacked orientation, which is so good for relative motion at the hips, for a lot of deep squatting and really nice clean hinging. And your client's just staring back at you at this hyperextended spinal position, be like, what do you mean? I am tucking my pelvis. It's really hard to identify what position your body's in, especially if you've never been in that position before or you don't have a good reference point. So in our GPP education system, this is why we really emphasize this ground-based to standing model of developing movement quality in our clients. So when your client's just there with the barbell on their back and they can't squat deep properly because they're in this hyperlordotic position, and you're telling them to tuck their pelvis, and I'm telling you, your client is trying to please you. So they're definitely doing their best. If you've said it 3 times and they're not doing it, they're not gonna get it. And so what I teach coaches to do is to get the barbell back into the rack, lay that person down on the ground, laying on their back, so then they can feel all that space under their lower back or under their lower rib cage. It's so much easier to draw their attention or make them aware of the shape or position they're in when they're laying on the ground, because they'll just feel a lack of contact with the ground. So a lot of people would call this like a 90-90 breathing position, where your feet are up on the wall, knees, hips, and ankles are bent at 90 degrees, full spine is in contact with the ground, and then we can go through some breathing there, you know what I mean? Just try to get them to sort of brace in that position. Now they've got this phenomenal reference point for when they're back under the bar. You can reference what they were feeling on the ground. They're like, okay, so when you got into that more stacked or less extended position, what muscles did you feel switch on a little bit more? What muscles did you feel relax a little bit more? And it's so much easier to reference that because, again, it's something that they've experienced before, so they're going to have a much easier time doing it under a barbell or in some other context where they're not supported by the ground. You can then take this lesson and apply it to a lot of your machine-based training as well. Like, again, think about a hack squat, think about a pendulum squat. They're getting the same amount of contact points, and this dramatically enhances their proprioception. Giving people things to touch or things touching their body instantly increases their awareness of where they are in space. And if you're creative with your ability to add and remove constraints, it's really, really easy to scale these exercises to the point where then they don't need any reference points. You can put the bar on their back, you can put the bar on their collarbones, wherever you want, and they'll just be able to call on the shapes that you want them to make to successfully complete the exercise exactly how you want them to do it, loading the appropriate tissues and not loading the things that we're looking to give a rest on that exercise. Anyway, if you want to learn more techniques for getting your clients to move better without scaring the crap out of them from a certified movement optimist, then check out the links for GPP level 1 down below. And I know I'll keep saying it, but I am hoping to increase my YouTube schedule. So hopefully I have more of like a podcast life update video coming out in a couple of days, because there's a bunch of stuff that I have to talk about. Obviously the podcast hasn't been up and running for close to 6 months now, so a little bit of a return to that sort of content, but coming at you from the YouTube channel. Anyway, I'll see you with another video in a couple of days.